In September of 1940, a few months after the Nazis had taken control of France in the early stages of World War II, a French teenager walking his dog stumbled into maybe the greatest archaeological find in all of human history. The network of caves that this kid stumbled into is known as Lascaux Cave. Inside, there are hundreds of paintings from Paleolithic times, at least 15,000 years old, maybe older. The paintings consist mostly of animals: deer, bull, birds, horses, one strange-looking early human with a bird head. Obviously, archaeologists and historians have debated ever since about just what these images mean, exactly how old they are, and what they say about our early human ancestors. But you could certainly make the argument that these paintings represent the end of prehistory. If humans could now record their experience on the wall of these caves, then history as we know it can now begin. At least a history that can be written down, recorded, and reflected upon. The Lascaux Cave is a time capsule, a portal into the past, into a world that we will never be able to fully comprehend. But this time capsule can also give us some artifacts of, and maybe even some glimpses into that world. Probably a scary world of violence and beasts, hunt or be hunted, every day a struggle to survive. A world unlike any other, the world of the first humans, prehistory. Meanwhile, in August of 1945, humanity got its first glimpse of posthistory, the world where history would no longer be recorded, or maybe not even matter anymore. On August 6, 1945, the culmination of the Manhattan Project to produce the world's first nuclear weapons went on full display for the world to see. In what supporters of this nuclear bombing would say was an attempt to end World War II humanely, the United States would drop an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima, and then another one just a few days later on the city of Nagasaki. When the dust settled, at least 100,000 people were killed instantly in these bombings. Tens of thousands would die slower, more agonizing deaths. But perhaps more amazing is that some people actually survived. Shigeko Matsumoto was one of those survivors, and he would eventually describe his experience of the bombing and the post-history hellscape that came after. Matsumoto says, quote, "There were no air raid alarms on the morning of August 9th, 1945. We had been hiding out in the local bomb shelter for several days, but one by one, people started to head home. My siblings and I played in front of the bomb shelter entrance, waited to be picked up by our grandfather. Then, at 11:02 a.m., the sky turned bright white. My siblings and I were knocked off our feet and violently slammed back into the bomb shelter. We had no idea what had happened. As we sat there, shell-shocked and confused, heavily injured burn victims came stumbling into the bomb shelter en masse. Their skin had peeled off their bodies and faces and hung limply down on the ground in ribbons. Their hair was burnt down to a few measly centimeters from the scalp. Many of the victims collapsed as soon as they reached the bomb shelter entrance, forming a massive pile of contorted bodies. The stench and heat were unbearable. My siblings and I were trapped in there for 3 days. Finally, my grandfather found us, and we made our way back to our home. I will never forget the hellscape that awaited us. Half-burnt bodies lay stiff on the ground, eyeballs gleaming from their sockets. Cattle lay dead along the side of the road, their abdomens grotesquely large and swollen. Thousands of bodies bobbed up and down the river, bloated and purplish from soaking up the water. "Wait, wait," I pleaded, as my grandfather treaded a couple of paces ahead of me. I was terrified of being left behind. End quote. A time capsule of a different kind there. Into the future. A glimpse of a world unlike any other. The world of the last humans. Post-history. Some people believe that history is a cycle. That the things that have happened now have already happened 1,000,000 times. And they'll happen again 1,000,000 times more. I don't know if I necessarily embrace or reject this view, but I do embrace the much simpler claim that returning to the past is useful as a means of telling us about the future. If history is a cycle, then learning from the past is simply also a surefire glimpse into the future. But even if history is not a cycle, then learning about the past can still give us an idea of the future. So with that said, we have these two moments in time: the discovery of the Lascaux Cave in France and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And they give us insight into these two opposite yet similar eras of humanity: prehistory, before anything was written down, and posthistory, when there would be no more history. And the parallels between these two extreme epochs of humanity are interesting to say the least. Historian Maria Stavernaki, in her essay titled Prehistory and the Atomic Age, says, quote, "Despite the difference in their temporal constitution and their positions at the extremities of human time, one in the deep past, the other in the 20th century, a reciprocal, analogical relationship exists between them. We have learned to imagine one through the other. This analogical relationship has left a lasting mark on the Western historical consciousness, which appears across politics, art and culture, philosophy, and the human and social sciences." End quote. So, what exactly is the relationship between these two extremes of human time, as Maria Stavernaki says there? In some ways, Stavernaki says that we have the cave paintings at Lascaux, and we have the beginnings of the atomic age, which are demonstrated by those bombings at the end of World War II. And in a lot of ways, they can only be understood together. There's a reason why the phrase being bombed back to the Stone Age is probably a phrase that is somewhere in everybody's deep consciousness. Stavernaki says, and she references a French philosopher named Georges Bataille here, but she says, quote, "Through these paintings of animals, ancient humans were able to deliver a message to their modern descendants. For Bataille, the message was clear. The paintings showed the decisive moment that the human species emerged from animality, a moment that finds its symmetrical complement and cancellation in Harry Truman's decision to drop the atomic bomb over Hiroshima on the morning of August 6, 1945. If the sumptuous paintings at Lascaux were expressions of our ancestors ceasing to be mere animals, then the double explosion in Japan had brought the species back towards its animal state, as the populations of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were struck by baffling, horrifying bolts of lightning from the sky that eluded their understanding. The extreme violence of the bomb had produced complete unintelligibility, reducing those it struck to death and stupor, and returning human creations and life to dust and stone. Bataille believed that in the wake of Hiroshima, quote, "an avaricious, staggering, interminable revelation began for everyone," End quote. Back to Stavronaki now. Or rather, the opposite of a revelation. The bomb's only communication, its only message, was that of annihilation. To Bataille and other intellectuals, Hiroshima became the inverted image of Lascaux. End quote. Okay, so that's a lot of historian and philosopher speak there, but the idea is that we have these two moments in time, right? The discovery of these cave paintings and what they represent, and the atomic bombings and what they represent. So for many people, the cave paintings represent humanity finally overcoming our animalistic roots. Instead of just running around like animals, chasing other animals, eating and sleeping and procreating, now humanity was creating art, demonstrating evidence of culture, leaving a historical legacy for people that came after. So again, the Lascaux Caves represent humanity overcoming those animalistic roots, but only for the atomic desolation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to demonstrate humanity returning to our hunter-gatherer, animalistic, nasty, brutish, and short origins. History as a cycle. This is the future giving us insight into the past, and vice versa. The destruction of Nagasaki allows us to look at the Lascaux cave paintings in a new way. We can now assign human characteristics and meaning to them in a way that we couldn't have done before. Another argument made by Stavronaki in this piece is that humanity is now in a new age called the Anthropocene. What that means is that we are now at the point in human evolution where any changes to the earth are the result of decisions made by humans. We are the masters of our blue planet. But with that mastery comes the power to destroy it and ourselves. Most of us are probably familiar with the Greek figure Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. The old Greek myth is a metaphor for human ingenuity, progress, striving for knowledge and achievement, advancement, science and technology, the conquest of humanity over nature, the pinnacle of civilization. But be careful of overdoing it in the name of progress. Prometheus was punished to die an infinite number of deaths for his ambition. And does the atomic age represent the pinnacle of human progress, as so many think? Or is it a break from human progress, a sideline or concurrent stream that separates us from what it means to be human? I think this question of humanity in posthistory is worthy of exploration. One reality of the atomic age is the question of what do we do with all the nuclear waste as a result of our adventures in science? How do we prevent future humans, or a hypothetically benevolent alien species, from wandering into a nuclear waste area and suddenly taking a time capsule pill back to Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945? Believe it or not, this is actually an idea that so-called future panels came up with during the Cold War, and this actually came to fruition. So the idea was to create and build monuments on top of nuclear waste dumps. These monuments would look hideous. They would have sharp objects pointing out of them. They would have signs saying to stay away at all costs. Death is coming to anyone who presses forward. These monuments would have to last tens of thousands of years, and they would have to convey meaning and humanity just by looking at them. The idea is to make the monument itself the message that carries the meaning. And that meaning would have to be conveyed through something so dangerous that you would have to be crazy not to immediately notice it and turn away, because otherwise you would be radiated to hell if you pressed on. One of these future panels came up with a report, and here's their recommendation for what these nuclear waste monuments should be about and what types of messages they should convey. Quote, "This place is a message and part of a system of messages. Pay attention to it. Sending this message was important to us. We consider ourselves to be a powerful culture. This place is not a place of honor. No highly esteemed deed is commemorated here. Nothing valued is here. What is here was dangerous and repulsive to us. This message is a warning about danger. The danger is in a particular location. It increases towards the center. The center of danger is here, of all particular size and shape, and below us. The danger is still present, in your time as it was in ours. The danger is to the body, and it can kill. The form of the danger is an emanation of energy. The danger is unleashed only if you substantially disturb this place physically. This place is best shunned and left uninhabited." End quote. When thinking about that very message right there, and when thinking about what these monuments might look like, these future panels turned for inspiration to the ancient monuments of the prehistoric age: Stonehenge, Altamira, the great mounds, pyramids, the temples of the past that make you feel something when you look at images of them. And of course, they also turned to Lascaux Cave, history as a cycle once again. Now, as I read about nuclear waste monuments, and as I thought about prehistory and posthistory, I couldn't help but remember an old short story from the great Ken Liu. It's called The Message. One aspect of this story is the meaning of history and the drive to share the past with the future, preserving a legacy as a civilization or a species and passing it on to whatever comes next. This is what the early humans in that cave at Lascaux were doing, whether they knew it or not. Ken Liu says, quote, "The human race has explored the stars for a long time, yet we're still alone. All the alien civilizations we found are dead. Most civilizations are very self-centered and focus only on the present. They don't think much about preserving a legacy for those who might come long after they're gone. Their art and poetry, their rise and fall, their brief time in this universe, most of that is beyond recovery. The last traces of their existence will be gone. But I always feel that there is a message that the people I study want to pass on. Whatever I discover will be the last testament and whisper of the people of this planet. In studying them, I become connected to them. And in passing on their message, the human race is no longer so alone." End quote. If history is a cycle, then we often think about prehistory and archaeology and looking back at the past as fundamental to history. But we rarely examine post-history in the same way. We are also artifacts of the future, and our actions and legacy now determine how our own time capsules will end up shaping that future. This story, The Message by Ken Liu, is also about an estranged father and daughter who begin growing closer together as they explore the ruins of what we eventually find out is an old nuclear waste monument. I think the story does a nice job highlighting how building these monumental nuclear time capsules is so important and has to be done in a way that people or aliens who come across it in the future will understand. And it all has to be done without language. We rely on language for so much, but in 10,000 years, our language won't be so useful to future humans and others. How do we express meaning without language? Now, this all may seem pie in the sky and a little esoteric to the more practical folks in our listening audience, but you might just simply think of it as saving the people who come after you, just like any parent would do for their child. I won't spoil the ending of that short story here, but Ken Liu says, talking through the main character and about the humanity and beauty in these nuclear monuments and extending that to his own humanity. Quote, "Even as they were dying, they thought to look outside themselves and speak to the future." End quote. One of the reasons I love Ken Liu as an author is he puts humanity at the center of topics that initially seem idealistic and impractical. Sometimes this applies to the very things we are discussing today. Science fiction, archaeology, future studies, history. At times, these things can seem impractical. But we have to remember that time capsules of the past that we uncover, or the monuments we build now to protect the future, these things are not representations of the past or the future. They are the past or the future. And there's no reason not to extend this idea to our own personal lives. The idea is that just like the ancient hunter-gatherers put a piece of themselves into that cave art and essentially put it in a time capsule for us to see so many thousands of years later, we all do the same thing every day. We put ourselves into our surrounding environments slowly, over time, maybe until there's nothing left of us. Philosopher Crispin Sartwell, in an essay called "What My Mother's Sticky Notes Show About the Nature of the Self," talks about how dementia slowly and terribly captured her mother while she watched, essentially helpless. As her mother's memory failed, she increasingly had to put her memory into the objects and the environment around her just to be able to get through the day. At first, this process was serviceable, warding off the dementia through a David Chalmers-esque extended mind type of idea. But remembering is who we are. And if we can't remember, the self is permanently damaged. Sartwell says, quote, "In some ways, we all do this. We scatter photos or significant objects about our space so that as we move through it, we remember. Most people walking around their homes are using the journey method, or at least are potentially on a nostalgic journey among artifacts into their own past. A memory palace is not just images in our heads, but consists of things in our built environment. One way Joyce held on to her memories was the use of Post-it notes. For a decade or more, she wrote down everything she wanted to remember: people's names and phone numbers, appointments, movies she wanted to see, books she wanted to read, quotations to be read aloud at her memorial service, and many other matters. She posted them all around her desk and up on walls. More and more, every fact required a note, and they proliferated into stacks and piles, most of them no longer visible under the later accretions. Notes with regard to how to operate the television piled up around the television, food reminders from years past accumulated in the kitchen. The notes eventually drifted down over everything. Once she had lost track of a note, a process that had accelerated as her memory has declined, another note had to be made if the same fact was to be retrieved, and so on. It was as though I had smashed a window, letting a wind roar through her mind palace, disarranging everything. End quote. Sartwell here is very terribly describing battling dementia, which is the worst type of forgetting what you don't remember. But as we navigate our own lives, we leave legacies behind. The same residue that is on the walls of those caves in Lascaux, that same residue is left in the people we leave behind, the homes we make, the things we love and accomplish over time. Sartwell says, quote, "My mother's memory went from being an imagined place or palace inside her to being largely identical to her physical environment. The process of remembering got steadily externalized over a period of 20 years. Perhaps this is how human personality fragments or disintegrates. As it frays, it extends into the world, even desperately, and alters it, rearranges it into a memory hoard. It wasn't only the notes, after all. If self is memory, her house and its every artifact, every print and every spatula, every earring and every room, is in her, and she is in it. But then the real place, too, is in constant change. It blows away bit by bit, yellows, erodes. Your son comes and rearranges or empties it, and you are lost. As things that remember, perhaps humans disintegrate from inside outward until we are no longer distinct from our environments. Slowly, our memories and the world become the same, and we at once cease to exist and expand into everything." End quote. Prehistory and Posthistory. The ancient humans painting on the caves at Lascaux, and the modern and doomed humans trying to survive an atomic blast at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Two mirrors facing each other. To wrap up here, I couldn't shake a quote from the great novel Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Quote, "His origins are become remote as his destiny, and not again in all the world's turnings will there be terrains so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay." If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe on Patreon for bonus episodes and other perks. You can also join the Patreon for free to get a monthly recommendations email and a sneak peek at what's up next. You can support in other ways, of course, by leaving a rating or review in your podcast app, by following on social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, etc., by sharing with a friend, or simply by continuing to listen. You can also sign up for the email newsletter that I've been working on. Links to all of this stuff are in the show notes. Any comments or suggestions you can send to reflectinghistory@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. As always, that's it for now.